Today I am at the ruins of the ancient city of Perge. The ruins of the city of Perge are located within the territorial boundaries of the city of Antalya. The main street of the city of Perge was Arcadian Street, which means an ideal country or a country that is idealized. This street began at the main city gate. These gates were built in the 2nd century AD, belonged to the ancient Roman period and were named after Emperor Septimius Severus. In front of the gates themselves there is a small square paved with slabs. This square, by the way, was located between the city walls. On both sides of these gates, the city walls extend. On this side they are destroyed, but here the watchtower is very well preserved. The gates are made of stone blocks, and in these stone blocks you can see shallow holes. And it can be assumed that these walls were faced with marble slabs. From the inside, the ancient Roman gates look more beautiful. And what's more, the stone blocks that once belonged to these gates have been preserved here. That is, you can see the cornices, the typical ancient Roman cornices with a pearl ornament. Someone has already tried to scratch something here. Such beautiful patterns. Here are a few more stone blocks that were once cornices. These cornices hung over this entrance, over this portal. And, by the way, the base has been preserved here. The columns stood on this base. And these columns supported these stone vaults. And here is the stone vault itself. This is the lower part of the ceiling. And here you can see a hole. So, something was attached here. These holes were used to attach something. And here are the gates themselves. They are depicted in this drawing. This is how these ancient Roman gates once looked from this side. These are the columns that stood on this pedestal, on this plinth. By the way, the blocks of this plinth are marble, and on the other side of the gate, there is the same base. Here are the semicircular vaults that once hung over this passage here. You can see how they are made on this side, which are adjacent to each other. They were not processed, not polished. And this is a no, this is not a single one, these are two different stone blocks. Here they are. This is how they were adjusted to each other. We see the pearl ornament again. And here is the plant ornament. And on the other side, the same thing, absolutely the same. Here are more of the same blocks that once formed parts of this vault. And here is the cornice, the pediment of this cornice. And here are the inner, or rather, the upper parts of these vaults, semicircular vaults. They are not processed at all. That is, these are the parts that were not visible to people, they were left in this unprocessed form. And here you can see the metal. It was with the help of this metal that these blocks were attached. You can see, by the way, that it is marble. That is, here there was another block, and this metal fastened these blocks. Here you can see it too, but there is no metal here, although there are traces of it. In the center of these vaults there were plant rosettes, and in the corners of these rosettes there were also small plant ornaments. But this block is interesting. This block also once formed part of this vaulted ceiling, but here there are depicted a bereft and animals. This looks like a fish or a dolphin. So, and here, and this is not an animal, this is some kind of animal with wings and a human face. Here's another animal that looks like a bird. And this already looks like a tiger. And this looks like a lizard. Something like a lizard. And here is a running doe. The most diverse animals are depicted here. Here's another interesting image. This is an image of the Gorgon Medusa. Another stone block. Also unprocessed on that side, but processed on this side. This also seems to belong to the pediment. There are parts of columns lying around nearby. Perhaps these are the columns from these gates. And here are the capitals. The capitals of the Charon order are made in such a beautiful floral pattern. And these cornices were already on them. Here you can also see a hole. A metal rod was also inserted here. Metal can be found everywhere. Here again we see a metal rod. This is lead. That is, a hole was made like this. Lead was poured into it and a metal bracket was inserted, connecting two adjacent blocks. Here's another interesting ancient Roman block. Here you can also see a pearl ornament. And on this surface there is a solar symbol in the form of a silostica. This part of the block is not processed. Most likely, it was connected to another block, and this surface was open. Look, what an interesting block. Wow. I have not seen this, by the way. I have been to the city of Perge several times. Here it looks like something like a mask, a screaming mask. Here's the same thing, but the face here is already broken off. And here there was some animal, which can be seen well preserved right here. Wow! Look at this gorgeous ornament. Gorgeous bas-relief. This is how they did it. They chose a stone here, left the wings. And here too. It took such skill to choose a stone from inside this cavity, leaving only these eye sockets and a screaming mouth. Gorgeous. And these details, it seems, are the remains of the wings of this animal. You can see it here. And look, here is such a gorgeous solar symbol, again, in the form of a swastika and again a pearl ornament. And here is another similar block with the same masks and the same animals. Right after the ancient Roman Septimius Severus Gate there was a small square, which was bordered by these Hellenistic gates. And to the left of this square there was a beautiful fountain, Illinife. Here it is. It was a huge fountain. Behind there was a wall, which is no longer preserved, and water came from this wall. And here are the pools, the preserved stone blocks of this pool. Here, too, the water was overflowing. Local residents could collect water here, and in this pool, the water splashed and created a certain coziness and freshness on a hot summer day. And here, by the way, is the drainage system. This is where the water went through the drainage system. Along this pool, you can also see a small channel. Most likely, the overflowing water flowed here. And in these niches, there were sculptures. They stood on these pedestals. And on top, there were also sculptures and columns that supported the vaults of this fountain. These columns once supported the stone vaults and formed a propylon. That is, these were the gates, the front gates, through which people entered the baths. It was just behind this propylon that the baths were located, granite columns. And on one of the columns, or even on two of the columns, you can see marble carillon capitals, smoothly polished. Until now they have not eroded, they still retain their smooth surface. Here on such pedestals were the columns. This is a marble base. Here you can also see a hole where lead was poured again, a metal pin was inserted, this base was fastened to it, and a granite column was installed on it. And through these gates, through these front gates, one could already pass the ancient Roman baths, ruined, which can be seen. The baths of the city of Perga were famous, when they were the largest baths in the Pamphylia region. On this side was the Palaestra. Athletes and young warriors trained here. It was an open courtyard, and along the perimeter of this courtyard there was a covered gallery. These columns supported the stone vaults. Here you can also see the remains of a water channel between the covered gallery and the Palaestra. Fresh cold water flowed in this channel. Before entering this Palaestra, athletes washed their feet here. Well, it was also possible, probably, to rinse off on hot summer days, doing exercises here. People overheated and could certainly cool down here. And here is the actual bathhouse. This is the apoditerium or changing room. The first thing people got here. They undressed here, so there is nothing here. And this is the round structure. At first, when I first got there, I thought it was some kind of fountain. But then, as I learned from Turkish sources, these are the remains of a furnace. Already in the Byzantine period, marble sculptures were brought here to this apoditerium, to this changing room. And they burned it here, thus processing the marble and turning it into lime, which was then used for construction. But why did they burn marble sculptures in the Byzantine period, since images were not encouraged in Christianity in the first centuries, so they were not held in high esteem? Even if they were not used, they tried to either destroy them, or somehow hide or eliminate them. Here you can see beautiful marble columns and their capitals. These capitals stood on these marble columns, capitals of the in each order. With such shells, curls. The edges have been preserved to this day, very smooth, clear edges and again the characteristic ancient Roman pearl pattern. Here with the palestra or with the fitness room or in another way it was also called a gymnasium, a border pool. This did not yet apply to the bathhouse, it also applied to this gymnasium, to this fitness room. Perhaps those same athletes splashed in the waters of this pool here. You can see the preserved stairs. Here you can also see the stairs. Here you can see the preserved marble cladding. Thus, the walls of this pool were covered with such marble slabs. They were strengthened with cement mortar. Here you can also see the remains of columns. These columns probably supported some kind of vaults, and along the perimeter of this pool, niches and pedestals have been preserved. On these niches, or rather, on these pedestals and in these niches, there were sculptures. Here, too, there is very well preserved greenish marble cladding. By the way, they are of different thicknesses. You can see it. Here it is thinner, and here they are thick. And with the help of cement mortar they leveled out these inaccuracies. Thus, the outer surface was already perfectly flat. Here you can also see the marble floor cladding. The floor was lined with white and gray marble, and the walls with greenish marble. Along the entire perimeter of this wall, you can see the preserved green marble cladding slabs. This is how gorgeous it is. Wow! Then, by the way, for some reason, apparently, later this marble cladding was covered with plaster, most likely in the Byzantine period. The city, by the way, existed in the Byzantine period. And it was the Byzantine period, at the end of the Byzantine period, it was abandoned. He gives the reason that the Kestros River, which determined the flourishing of the city of Perge as a trading and shipping city, became shallow and turned into a swamp. And because of this, Perge lost out to the competitive struggle with the growing city of Antalya. The residents left it. But this slab is very thick, quite thick. In this part, the floor marble cladding is very well preserved. You can even see the slabs as they were cut here. You can imagine how it all looked here. Very beautiful. Well, and then the baths themselves begin. Here you can also see the faced stairs. They were white marble. And the first room is a cold room. There was also a pool here. Also along the perimeter of this pool are niches, pedestals and the remains of columns. These columns also supported the arches of this room. By the way, why exactly in the bathhouse of the Persia period were the stoves built? Because there was probably a large concentration of marble sculptures here. And in order not to drag the foolishness far, they slyly built it here. Here, the marble facing of this floor has been very well preserved. Such diverse slabs. The next room is already a warm room. It was already hot here. The same room. On this side, there are also large window openings, but here there is already a small pool. That is, apparently, in a hot room, a pool was not particularly needed. Here is such a small pool. But also, apparently, people settled here. From that hole, water came out, and into this hole it went. And you can also see the marble facing of this pool. And on this side, you can see the preserved hypocastus. This is an underground heating system, which was very widespread in the ancient Roman period. Here, under the floor between these galleries, between these tunnels, hot air passed through these tunnels, thus heating the floor. But you can see that here it is only in this part of the room, that is, not throughout the entire room. The walls were very large, the room was very high. And that's why it was only warm, not hot. But the next room was a hot room, entry is prohibited there, so you can only look from here. But even from here you can see that there is a hypocastus or underfloor heating system that runs throughout the entire room. And there is a very well-preserved pool here. The same pool is here, but here the slabs of this pool are better preserved. It seems that this is all, but that's not all. From the cold room here you could go out into an open gallery. People rested in this gallery, sculptures stood here. By the way, you can see the pedestal on which one of the sculptures stood. Inscriptions have been preserved here. Here they covered it with a rag. It looks like there is either a mosaic or something else. Okay, I won't open it. So, here along the entire perimeter there were pedestals. Here are a few more pedestals, on which statues also stood. But here there was another feature, the feature of the city of Perge. Here was one of the largest museums of antiquity. Here on these pedestals you can also see inscriptions. Restored. These are the remaining original inscriptions. Here was the largest mosaic of antiquity, which was considered the second after Alexandria, and competed with it. So, to get to it, you had to go through this gallery. Here are a few more pedestals. Here you can also see a pool. That is, people rested in this gallery, they had conversations here. Here is a small etc. There were benches, that is, those who wanted to could swim in this pool, on the territory of this covered gallery. And here was a pool already covered with ceramic slabs, not marble. Although no, here are the stairs also covered with marble slabs. And from there, water flowed through these niches along these same foreheads. That is, it flowed here like a waterfall. So, that's it, I can't get to this museum. You can also see the remains of cornices. And here is the museum itself. This is a fleet museum. Through these baths, through this gallery, or rather, one could get into the premises of one of the largest museums of antiquity. Here is the museum premises. What is interesting? What is the museum of the city of Perge known for? That there is a description that the phalanges of giants who once lived were kept in this museum. How reliable this is, I cannot say, but here is such interesting information. It is possible that this museum was created precisely for this purpose, to preserve those very remains of giants. Well, and then they began to attach other interesting things here. The half-muse was also outlined with marble slabs. Open the entrance into the Renistic Tower. The portal is made of stone blocks. They look like ancient Roman. It is possible that these towers were restored in the ancient Roman period. And here you can also see a hole. That is, these stones were faced. The remainder of the metal. By the way, the metal has been preserved. Lead. And this is how the Hellenistic towers looked. Here you can also see holes. These were, most likely, interfloor ceilings. They were attached here. That is, the tower was multi-tiered. And these are loopholes. Very well preserved loopholes with a wide base inward and a narrow one outward. It was just right for shooting. A person could fit in. That is, he would climb right into this niche and shoot from there, thus not letting the enemy in. There were two entrances to this tower.